Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gord, number 25 in our Average Folks in the Afterlife series. And more fascinating encounters and experiences from Jürgen Zhu in his Vistas of Infinity collection. I think I'll just plunge right in. They're quite self-explanatory. March 2010. I did achieve lucidity shortly after I returned to bed and dropped off to sleep. As soon as I entered a dream, I became lucid, but had difficulty controlling it. I spent most of my time struggling to achieve full waking consciousness. By staring at my hand, I gradually cleared my mind and became fully lucid. I was horrified to discover that I had entered a world populated by life-sized 3D cartoon characters milling around in a cartoon town. I was irritated considerably, thinking that I was still in some sort of lucid dream state, and tried to figure out a way of piercing this illusion in order to arrive in a consensus reality. I needed to be absolutely certain that this reality was not a mental projection or fantasy. I tried various techniques, such as the command, "Clarity now," and staring at the ground. It was of no avail. The characters, stiffly animated cartoon men and women with drawn-on clothes and painted facial expressions, were walking around all over the place like spooky robots. Staring at the scene and intending to dissolve the illusion had no effect whatsoever. I was darting between them over streets with painted cobblestones and painted-on pavements. There were a number of shops as well. Some were brightly lit, others wide open, all beautifully hand-drawn, but I was the only live person in the strange cartoon world. Inside some of the shops were giant cartoon TV screens, and on the screens, cartoon animations of action heroes were playing. By now I couldn't help but admire the craftsmanship of the animation, which was in black and white and exceedingly stylishly executed. I was tempted to stay and watch, but was only too aware that my purpose had been to raise my consciousness and try to enter a higher dimension, with the aim of ascertaining more knowledge about the nature of that reality. I was trying to find my way out of this comic world and aimed towards the end of the road where I could see some real workshops and two men busily operating controls that were quite flat, like clipboards. They were busy moving their fingers across it, and as I got closer, I noticed that these two men were in charge of the artificial cartoon world I was just escaping from. They smiled broadly at me as I approached. "Are you in charge of this?" I asked. "Yes," was the answer from one of the men. He had short blonde hair and was wearing jeans. The other guy was still busy controlling his character and barely acknowledged me. "So this is not my dream then," I concluded with relief. "No," the blonde man replied. "This is our dream. We created this town and the characters. Do you like it?" It was only now that I could relax and admit that I was clearly impressed by their accomplishment. What was most impressive of all was the distinct style of their life 3D drawings. "What is all this for?" I wanted to know. "It's just for fun. We are comic nuts. It's even more fun when somebody like you appears out of nowhere and stumbles into our creation. You should have seen your face." The other chap, whose hair covered his eyes, now turned toward me with a broad grin. "I am impressed," I said. "How do you guys do this?" "We can actually mass-produce these guys. Once we have worked out how to use them, they have a sort of limited intelligence of their own, and we project the films we have been working on throughout the town as well. What do you think?" I said that I was really impressed and that I could not fault in any way what they had achieved, but that I was puzzled imagining how this was possible. They explained to me that it isn't all in the imagination, and if you're passionate about your hobby, you'll have no problem creating whatever you want to. Then, out of the blue, one asked me whether I was hungry, and nodded towards a conveyor belt coming out of a building with large windows through a hatch. This was very much like I had seen in some London sushi restaurants. If you don't like any of our food, you can just create your own. Just imagine it. It's easier if you actually like it, though. No sooner had he said that than I saw a plate moving toward the hatch with a German curry sausage and chips with mayonnaise. I don't know what made me choose this, but perhaps it was more to do with some distant nostalgia to my German student days than a desire for genuine food. After all, I did not feel hungry in the least. As soon as my plate passed through the hatch, I noticed that I had created a real unappetizing slush, with the chips drowning in ketchup and the sausage hanging limply, unappetizingly over the edge of the plate. When the plate reached me, I picked it up. My two hosts burst out laughing when I picked up a soggy chip between my thumb and forefinger. I thanked the two chaps for the demonstration and indicated that it was time for me to move on. It was difficult, though. Somehow I seemed to have lost my motivation when I rose up in the air, conjuring up more elevated feeling than would help me to rise to a higher level. The other thing that interfered with my plans was that I was struggling to retain lucidity. For a few moments I sailed through a sea of coloured clouds of light, but then my attention was diverted to my neck, which had assumed a stress position against my crumpled up pillow. Ah, yes. Sailing through multicoloured clouds of light. Oh, I've been there before. The Sales Assistant from Heaven, May 2012. I got up this morning at 5 a.m. for my meditation. Before I settled down, I grabbed my iPad and discovered messages from two people I'd communicated with online, responding to my post on Raymond Moody's book, Glimpses of Eternity. The subject was concerning transformative experiences during NDEs, and I quickly typed a response, concluding with the suggestion that I would try to find a more relevant answer during my next OBE. Then I went into meditation. The good thing about early morning meditation is that the mind is so alert and fresh. After putting a few thoughts to rest, I focused on awareness. I never know where my meditation will take me because I never use my intent other than surrendering everything I am to the presence of stillness. Even finding out information about whether everybody who dies has a transformative experience, which I addressed only minutes ago, didn't matter any longer. All that mattered was the presence, or what I have come to regard as my silent companion. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a beautiful smiling female face appeared right in front of my closed eyes. She addressed me, calling my name in the sweetest voice imaginable, and then she turned away with a thrilling laugh and disappeared, leaving a happy feeling suspended in mid-air. I returned to focusing on awareness and allowed total surrender without paying attention to the lights that appeared amid images of seductive spaces. When I opened my eyes again after an hour, time seemed not to have passed. I didn't have a clue where I was in that time period, but I remembered my question and decided to go back to sleep, using lucid dreaming to attain an OBE and then contacting my guide. Soon after I fell asleep, I became lucid. I was walking through an elongated white hall. I was conscious, aware, and in OBE mode. Instead of calling for my guide to pose the question, my attention was drawn towards a group of people milling around at the far end of the hall, in front of a huge doorway. As is often the case with OBEs, the original intention is superseded by what is happening at the moment. I soon realized without a flicker of doubt that I was in a halfway station where people were waiting to be incarnated into new physical lives. The entrance was guarded by two serene, beautiful beings. People were gathered in little groups, talking. On a chair nearest to the entrance sat a young girl with her hands on her knees, looking down to the floor. She looked focused, with a beautiful smile on her heart-shaped face. She had beauty. Her face expressed an innocent passion and eagerness mixed with joy. I approached her, and with my inner reporter springing into action, I decided to interview her. "Hello," I said. "Can I ask you what you're up to?" She raised her head towards me and gave a warm smile. "I am going to be a sales assistant," she answered confidently. As I had already absorbed that these souls were on their way to new lives on Earth, I assumed that she must have been well informed. I was still taken aback, though, and quite amused by her certainty and joyful anticipation. If she had told me that she was going to be a millionaire, I wouldn't have been so surprised by her joy. I couldn't help but smile and feel a great love and affection for authentic genuineness. I realized that there are more people on Earth than I could imagine, all of whom have distinct ideas about what makes them happy and what they need for their personal growth. It was quite clear that she knew what lay ahead of her, and she had full trust in her decision. As she looked into my eyes, I felt her kindness and could not help but send her my affection. Suddenly she asked, "Are you going to look after me?" Her blue diamond-like pupils darted from side to side in eager anticipation of my answer. "I am afraid not, but I am sure you will be looked after by people only too eager to help you," I said with conviction. "I myself am not from here. I am from the very place you are going to, but I can promise you that I will make sure to be kind to all shop assistants." She laughed and then closed her eyes again. I was keen to talk to one of the two guards by the door. I approached the one standing to the left who had been casting his eyes over his flock. "They all seem to be very keen to go down to our old Earth," I said mentally. In response, I received a picture of an old woman, and the guard let me know that that was not always the case. The woman had been trying to incarnate many times over the last 80 years. I came to understand that she had died during the Great Depression in poverty, and every time she came into the hall, she went back out again. There was no pressure on her whatsoever, but every time she left the hall, she came back the next time a little bit more determined, but never quite convinced enough to take the plunge. I felt a dryness in my mouth and woke up from my OB without so much as a break in consciousness. I then realized I had failed to pose my question, but what I had come back with was noteworthy for my journal. Indeed, many times have I done the same thing. And that reminds me of a section in my own More Adventures in Eternity, where I, quote-unquote, interview some astral, souls getting ready to reincarnate and sort of taking a little time, quote-unquote, time out to focus on the upcoming incarnation and the various bits and bobs of karmic threads they're going to re-enter. And perhaps we'll get to that in another Average Folks. February 2014. Building a grand design in non-physical reality. Last night during an OBE, I visited a house which was strangely familiar. It was a big place with a large courtyard, perhaps 30 meters by 10, surrounded by many buildings, such as the main living quarters and others that looked like stables. The most significant feature, though, was a large dome-like structure at one end. It was all painted in a gleaming whitewash. As I entered the dome, I was stunned. I clearly identified it as my own property, which I had been working on and converting for years to bring it to the state it was now in. While going through different areas, I remembered the attention I had invested to get it to this level of completion. As I entered the main atrium, I found a small gathering of people who seemed to have taken over my place and had made it their own. One woman was using the main hall for her exhibition, and as I walked up the stairs, I found a bar tucked away just beneath the main dome. Another group of people had allocated part of a side extension into a kind of amusement area and were busy having a great time. Although I was pleased that my building had been put to such good use, I was disappointed that the murals I clearly remembered having painted along the ceiling had been covered up with white paint. I blamed myself for having neglected the building for so long. As I walked down the stairs again, I dislodged a handrail, which the artist who had put up the exhibition had incorporated as part of her artwork. She looked at me crossly as I tried to fumble it back into place. I simply said, "Don't worry, it is my own property." She looked startled at me as she recognized me as the rightful owner. While still in OBE, I contemplated the significance of what consciousness was trying to show me, and I found it was twofold. On the one hand, the building represented my lifelong work on myself, my career and my family. The murals dated back to my youth when I was writing and illustrating a children's story, but never finished it. The murals were the different illustrations for the book, each of which had taken me weeks in real life. That was over 30 years ago. Hence it had been forgotten and probably been fading away, so then was simply washed over. On the other hand, consciousness made it absolutely clear that I had been working in various other parts of the building over a very long period, and I now clearly remembered it. I also started recalling other events with great clarity. Paintings I had worked on, exhibitions I had put on, people I had met, old friends I knew well, none of which played any role whatsoever in my physical life. Here in my OBE state, not just one, but perhaps two or more parallel lifespans were rolled out in front of me, to my utter astonishment. Consciousness was clearly showing me that my physical life was just a small part of many other life experiences, and that, at night, possibly in a deep dream state or an even parallel to my waking state, I had been busy pursuing one or more alternative existences. With this, I thought, I sank into a semi-meditative state and began to remember more and more detail with astonishing clarity. I gained the realization that the life I am leading back in my physical body is only the tip of the iceberg, one of the many lives I am leading, or perhaps better, consciousness is leading, each of equal significance. Agreed on all points. This is the case. Now, whether this is true for everyone or just some of us, I'm never quite sure. I haven't done the research yet. But there certainly seem to be, as I pointed out in More Adventures into Eternity, 4 other Gords, or souls who will answer to the appellation Gordon if they are so called upon by those curious or those in need. And they operate quite without any permission or attention from this Gord. And they seem to have been projected from higher self either around the same time or shortly thereafter my physical incarnation. And although they have their independent existences, they are part of, an astral team, if you like. And when I'm out of body while asleep or projected in any number of situations, I'm able to do what is requested of me or, follow my own curiosity. But when I'm, physically occupied, as I am, many hours during the day, they can respond to requests, telepathic requests, as well as living their non-corporeal existence in the worlds of spirits. And I'm certainly not aware of all that they're up to, although, I could research it. I haven't done that yet. And as I say, all this is tinkered with in More Adventures in Eternity, which, I may get to at some point reading on this. February 2015, non-physical property developer. I was surprised when revisiting a big building project that I instantly recognized as my own. Upon entering, I remembered clearly having acquired it some years back, an old neglected place with rooms at the top filled with junk. Mind junk. that I figured the previous owners had left behind as they moved on. This particular building was in a large astral city with a big mountain range towering above. The house was situated on a large open thoroughfare. I was standing in one of the street-facing ground floor rooms. Everything was in a state of renovation with no builders in sight. It became clear to me that I hadn't touched the project for some time because probably it was such an ambitious project. Curiously, there was no entrance to the property from the front of the house at street level. Instead, it fronted a beautiful colonnade with elaborate columns supporting the first floor of the house. There were just 2 large rooms at the ground level of the front, a smaller kitchen to the left with a large dining area just behind the kitchen leading towards the back. The other half of the house at the front consisted of a massive lounge. Behind these 2 front rooms were 3 further rooms, of which the middle one was a large atrium, which also granted access onto the property. To the left and right were 2 more rooms. One to the left was for entertainment, and the one on the right was a studio. As I was walking through and inspecting the layout, friends of mine started to arrive, one of whom I recognized from my youth, who had been a collector of my early work. I met him in the studio area, where he immediately pointed to a large workbench and said how ideal the place was to create large paintings without having to work on the floor. The whole place needed plenty of work, and looking at it, I recalled who the builders were, the people I had put in charge previously to tackle the work. They obviously had left it unfinished as my attention had moved on. I now felt I wanted to complete it. Armed with a tape measure, I started surveying the space and at the same time visualized its completion. I was amazed by the unfinished detail, the thickness of the walls, the exposed floor, etc. I knew the next floor up consisted of 5 bedrooms, 2 on either side at the front, leaving a large open space in the centre, the whole fronted by an elaborate balcony. 3 more bedrooms were at the back of the first floor. Above that was another penthouse apartment, consisting no more than 2 large rooms. At the very top of the building was a massive round viewing room, accessed from the penthouse, with the round window filling the whole space. From here, the magnificent city with the epic landscape rising behind it could be viewed clearly with the utmost pleasure. Having had a thorough inspection of this magnificent grand design, I decided it was time for completion. I also remembered having similar projects in the past, one of which I have mentioned above, which had been then taken over by other people. This, however, offered so much pleasurable and creative potential that I felt it was worthy of attention and love, and I vowed that I would see it through to completion. And continuing right on, May 2015, the squatters. I came back to my place mentioned in the previous report exactly 3 months later to the day, and at first I did not recognize it. It had been completely taken over by a lively group of young artists. When I came into the main atrium, I was greeted by a young guy who seemed to recognize me, and he immediately started showing me around and introducing me to his fellow artists. When I got involved in studying an exhibition section of the work of a woman with a French name, a vibrant series of coloured pen and ink drawings, he called out for her in order to introduce me, but she didn't show up. We proceeded to look at other work and talk to other artists. The work was very diverse and enjoyable. When I looked through a window to the outside, I even found that the brickwork on the outside walls had been fashioned into a fascinating figurative 3D relief work. I turned to my guide and said with a smirk and an element of pride, "Of course, you know I own this building." He looked at me, beaming back. "Of course I know. I knew the moment you walked in, but you were never here." I replied that there could hardly be a better use for this property, and I felt delighted that it was being put to such vibrant expression. He then turned to me, telling me that they were expecting some people from the town, including 2 women who were art critics, and I asked whether I could do the honours of showing them around. He was surprised by the suggestion and eagerly accepted. Although I knew exactly the layout of my house, I had yet to meet all the artists who were occupying the rooms and had carved out little studio spaces. After a short while, a small troop of people arrived. Two young women who identified as the art critics, and three other guys who I wasn't sure what their particular interests were, but they were keenly interested in the Open House Art Academy that had sprung up over the last 3 months after I'd turned my back on it. The guy with the golden chain around his neck jokingly asked me whether I had taken out a public indemnity insurance, because you never know what might happen. He pointed with his chin to a young sculptor who was precariously balancing on top of his work to finish off some detail. I dread to think what that will cost me, I responded, and we both laughed as he joked. I can give you a quote because I used to be an insurance policy salesman. We then both walked to the top of the building, where a couple of chaps had turned the room into a small film theatre and been showing off some of their work, which was quaintly shot on old-fashioned 16mm film format, displaying scratches and slight discoloration. On closer viewing, I discovered that the film contained footage shot in the early 1950s. The operator told me that the idea behind it was to reproduce a clip with strong nostalgic feel, but telling a modern story. I spent another half an hour or so meeting people and discussing their work. I felt a strong sense of ownership and pride because I'd had the powerful sensation that it was the aura and the thought form I had inadvertently imbued the building with that had attracted the artists and led to this inspired takeover and appropriation. When I woke up, I lay still in order to aid recall. Yes, during the writing of More Adventures of Eternity and the projections and meditations that led to the text, I came across a music school, which I was told I had helped to design and build. And I didn't really want to confront that reality. It was an interesting building in that it was built on hilly, sort of rolling land with lots of trees. And, you can do that on the After. You don't need, floors don't need to be flat. They can be all kinds of stuff. And there was a sort of a glass ceiling, and large trees like oaks grew through the ceiling. The spaces in the ceiling that had been built around them. And people, when there's very large old trees, the roots form great big, almost bench-like protuberances through the surface of the soil. And people were, some people were sitting in between those practicing their instruments. And in other parts of the building as I walked around, more conventional hallways with practice rooms off them and stuff. People would walk by me and say, oh, hi, Gord. And I was like, oh no, you're kidding. I really did. A bit scary. And on another, and I don't think this made it into the book because I was too embarrassed to even mention it, I was approaching the hilly forested area where this music academy was, and had been placed before being born as Gordon, by me and others. I don't think I did it all by myself. In fact, I know I didn't. But I started to hear the music of a fairly modern string quartet. And I thought, and I'd been listening to Gavin Bryar's string quartets around that time, and I thought, it's just a memory of one of his, because it vaguely sounded like one of his sort of long, slow phrases that textured into minimalist sort of repetitions, like waves coming on a shore. And but the inner voice, which may be what Jürgen's talking about as the presence, or the companion. The inner voice, which I would hear in a lot of these explorations, said, "Oh no, Gord, that's one of yours." And I went, "Oh no." I can't put that in the book. No one will believe me. Anyway, I'm telling you now. And although I'm a huge fan of several genres of music, rock, classical, jazz, folk, world, I have had no pretensions to composing music in this incarnation, and I have no memories of being a composer in the quote-unquote past physical incarnations. But it would seem that I am there. Anyway, so consider that as you adventure yourself. Things that you may have conceived, explored, constructed, created on the astral that have almost next to nothing to do with your life here. Don't be surprised. Many talents are explored there that one chooses not to explore here, or one feels that it's too much work or too much struggle, or whatever. So ponder on this, and we shall return sooner than you will think. And in the interim, be well, be serene, and what was it Mayor Baba said? Don't worry, be happy. He said that a long time ago. I think after he came out of his vow of silence. And I was thinking about him because I was watching that Murray Lerner's documentary on the career of the band The Who. And of course, at a certain point, Pete Townsend stops doing psychedelics. And Mike McKinnery says, oh yeah, but a month after that, he started getting into Mayor Baba. And I remembered the essay that Pete Townsend wrote for Rolling Stone. 71, called In Love with Mayor Baba. So, as Mayor Baba said, after his vow of silence lapsed at some point, don't worry, be happy.